Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1105, the Small Business Capital Access and Job Preservation Act, a bipartisan bill that our colleagues, Representative Cooper, Himes, and Garrett, and I introduced earlier this year. I thank all of them for their leadership on this issue. I'd also like to thank Chairman Hensarling and, again, Chairman Garrett for their support and leadership on this bill as we were able to achieve a bipartisan vote out of the Financial Services Committee. Every member of this body can agree that with millions of Americans out of work, our top focus in Congress should be, and it must be, enacting policies to help spur job creation throughout our nation. Today, the House takes up another bill to encourage economic growth and job creation by increasing the flow of private capital to small businesses that are found on main streets all across America. At a time when the available avenues of capital and credit for small businesses continue to decrease, capital investments from private equity into our communities are more important than ever. Unfortunately, Dodd-Frank has placed a costly and unnecessary regulatory burden of SEC registration on advisors to private equity, while, by the way, exempting advisors to similar investment funds. These registration requirements do not improve the stability of our financial system, and they restrict the ability of private equity to invest capital in our small businesses to spur job growth. In Virginia's 5th District, my district, there are literally thousands of jobs that exist because of the investment of private equity. These critical investments allow our small businesses to innovate, expand their operations, and create the jobs that our communities need. If enacted, the unnecessary burdens on advisors to private equity funds that do not have excessive leverage would be eliminated, and they would be given the same exemption from the SEC's registration requirements that venture capital advisors enjoy. These registration requirements, which do not make the financial system any more stable, impose an undue burden on small and mid-sized private equity firms and decrease the ability of their investment to create jobs. During our Financial Services Committee hearing on the bill, witnesses discussed the costs these requirements have imposed on private equity firms. They force investment advisors to private equity to expend substantial resources that disproportionately affect small and mid-sized funds, with costs of hundreds of thousands of dollars annually or more to comply with these requirements. It is important to note that most people, including the SEC Chair, Mary Jo White, concede that private equity funds did not cause the 2008 financial crisis and are not a source of systemic risk, despite that argument being the impetus for the registration requirement under Dodd-Frank. These funds are not highly interconnected with other financial market participants, and therefore the failure of a private equity fund would be highly unlikely to trigger cascading losses that would lead to a similar financial crisis. Additionally, these funds invest primarily in illiquid assets, including small Main Street businesses found across our country. These businesses are diversified across multiple industries and therefore lack concentrated exposure to any single sector. Furthermore, investors in private equity firms are all sophisticated investors who negotiate for the strongest investor protections. These sophisticated investors include public pension funds, university endowments, nonprofit foundations, many of whom are the primary beneficiaries of private equity successes. Those investors typically are represented by counsel and heavily negotiate fund terms in advance of investing, including reporting governance and conflicts of interest. It should also be noted that H.R. 1105 does nothing to change the current federal law with respect to common law and statutory fiduciary protections owed by investors to advisors to private equity funds. These are already existing significant investor protections available both contractually and in the form of state and federal law, and anti-fraud protections, investor protections that exist whether or not the advisors are registered with the SEC. In the end, the costs of unnecessary registration represent real capital that otherwise could be used to invest in companies such as Virginia Candle in our district, a company that through private equity investment expanded from a garage in Lynchburg, Virginia, to millions of homes across the world. Beyond Virginia Candle in Virginia, private equity-backed companies employ over 7.5 million people. Let me say that again. Private equity backed companies employ over 7.5 million people nationwide in over 17,000 U.S. companies. The impact of the registration requirements stand to diminish job creation in each of the congressional districts represented on this floor today. I ask all my colleagues today to join me in voting yes on H.R. 1105 and pass this bill from the House in order to increase the flow of private capital to our small businesses so that they can innovate, grow, create jobs for the American people. Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I thank the gentleman. I give myself just